terrible Christians, like just terrible human beings. And it's not to say that they're all bad, because there are great people out there from every denomination and every, you know, religious belief. But because I do believe that goodness in and of itself is not just a Christian value, it's just a humane value. I think it's a human experience to experience being good, to experience just like bad. And it's not to a select group of people, it belongs to everyone. And you have the ability to discern things, and you have the wisdom to rationalize and say, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is good behavior, this is bad behavior. And I think a lot of people use influence, peer pressure that you brought up, anything to control people as a means so that they can feel comfortable about their own insecurities. And after the whole band era for us, and then we just kind of like moved on with our lives, we kept running into just negative experiences with people who were manipulators, people who were just terrible human beings. And I kept finding my my people, my tribe outside.
Hey, look, I got merch just so you know.
Yep, shameless plug right there.
I'm right. Yeah, listen, I got kids to feed, right?
For real, man.
Heading
Yo,
to college, right?
yeah.
All right, so we're gonna continue where we left off on the Brotherhood of Outcasts podcast episode. So Ronnie, going back to the question, how did Brotherhood of Outcasts form? How did it start? And how did that change your perception of Christianity?
Woo, child. Let me see where we last left off. I mean, we both had our branching paths of things that have happened in there. Just to summarize, just a wee bit of how we started off. Obviously at that point, I want to say it was around late 2007, early 2008-ish.
Mm,
Um, Mentally, I was already checked out when it came to band stuff and everything, with the fallout of Robbed and Restored and everything. It was life happens.
yeah.
Like Ramel had his thing going on, you had your own stuff going on, which is understandably so. Andy had his thing going on. Like everyone was just branching off elsewhere, and because life pulls people in different directions, and sometimes it doesn't always play out, and that's okay. And it's one of those things that you know it hurt at the time because it was like the last thing I wanted to deal with was the concept of going solo.
Mm,
Even though that was always an idea my dad always put in my head, like, hey, why don't you strike out on your own? And I was like, sounds good, but not that. I really wanted the camaraderie that comes with having a band,
yeah.
making music with other people, not just being stuck in my own bubble.
Yeah, get
You
new
know,
ideas and new feedback. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
because don't get
not.
me wrong, I can sit there and let and weaponize my ADHD all day, every day, but I think that there's value in gathering from other people and making something new with other people. It's like a chef can only do so much just cooking by himself all the time. Sometimes you kind of want a sous chef, one of the chefs in the room that can show you new stuff and new tricks. Where yeah, I can make magic together. And
Yeah.
then I
Sometimes
remember.
something, just one little spice can change the flavor of the entire meal. And that's
Yeah,
through music.
yeah. Like all it takes is a little bit of chile limon, and you got a little flavor in there. So I remember you and Larry had a whole event going on, and then you invited me, and it was like getting a band together. And I was like, God, I just one time, just one,
One time.
just once, right? And that's always how it starts. Yeah, just one time, and then finally get into rehearsal with you guys and with Arturo, and then I'm like. Oh shit. Magic just simply happened, sometimes gravity just happens.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was like, oh, shit. I mean, I'm used to being the one that's the self-starter, but I'm like, no, this time I'm brought in. And of course, in our last episode, we discussed the namesake problem, because initially we were just Golgotha,
Mhm.
but then, another band that's not even signed on a major label had the name, and we were like, crap. We tried to change it to Gorugota, which is more like a English version of the Japanese. It just didn't catch on. It just didn't roll out the tongue easy, especially with the demographic that we're around in New York City. Go figure. Um, but then Brotherhood of Outcasts, it was originally a concept I had for kind of making like a little club group, for people that are going through shit and feel like they're out of place with their family, with their friends,
Mhm.
with loved ones and everything, and just regular folk and just getting together and, being peoples, and
Now to
being able
tie
to
that,
people and socialize.
I want to tie
And
that back
then,
into Christianity for a second, because if you notice, in that's kind of the foundation of Christianity, about reaching out to the fallen sheep, the outcast, and extending
yeah,
yourself, allegedly. And we've seen it more times than not that that's not the case. If anything, it's like Christianity is its own club and you have to join it. And it's like you're preaching about meeting people at their needs and where they're at, the outcast, and you don't find the outcast inside the kingdom. That's one thing. The whole Bible even talks about that. Like all the outcasts were where? Outside of the kingdom. So
yeah.
it didn't ever like cross people's mind. They're like, nah, you got to bring them to church. Like, no, why don't you just bring the church to them? And I always found conflict with that. And I'm glad you brought that up about the outcast and about being a kind of like a beacon for people who were like religiously, socially, outcasted, which is it really is a great term. We were like a brotherhood of outcasts. Go on though, continue
And,
this.
and then we were all like slightly out of pocket in our own individual bubbles too. I mean, Sid had his own upbringing and experiences where it's like, whoa. Larry, like on paper, I'll just put it like this. You would think he just fits in just about anywhere, but then you realize it's like, no, he's got his own thing where it's like, he's got his boys, he's got his, friends and everything, but then there's something where it's like, there's always that little X factor that has him where it's like, he doesn't 100% fit in those groups. Like, he's there, he's floating through the motion, but his brain, is, and his heart is like, hey, I'm over here though,
Hmm.
you know, that type of thing.
Hmm.
So there's that. And then of course there's me. I mean, God, we already had the conversation about how I was being treated like a damn pariah within the Brooklyn church community, just for having an electric guitar that can do stuff.
Yeah. It's like any
And
ounce
the
of
fact
gain
that
in church
we,
was like the devil's music.
God, but then it's like we found this point where the four of us actually found common ground, and that's how it happened, you know. And then it was just learn how to navigate things. And of course, granted, we were all, from my understanding, in a slightly different predicament by that point, because by that point, modern music started being treated a little bit differently. And plus, we weren't in too many rajatabla churches anymore. We were more in non-denominational, or if we were in neo-Pentecostal churches, that they were more progressive, quote unquote,
Right. It
where
felt
they
like
were
at that
actually more
time,
receptive.
both the scene in New York and just church wise, where we were at in our walk away from faith, it seemed like we were transitioning out of more conservative values into a
Mhm.
more, you could say progressive, but just musically, as far as the music, I know that it was like, okay, less Spanish, more English stuff. And it was an interesting transition because you had the best of both worlds with us because we came from both worlds.
It's more like we weren't feeling as confined to being like, hey, you're in a Spanish Pentecostal environment. You got to stay within these parameters in order to
Right.
play in our environment. Now, in the churches we were actually performing in, and then even some club venues we were playing at, we had more of an open sandbox where it's like, okay, we can actually, put a little bit more of our rock and hard rock sounds and more of our experimental stuff to really show, hey, we're not just, slightly overdriven happy Latino Pentecostals. That's
Right.
not how it works. Like there's more to us than what you've seen in our formative years, within our individual journeys in music. And that actually felt refreshing because it was like, oh crap, like we don't have to worry about, someone ready to, throw a pitchfork up our ass.
Yeah.
Now it's like, okay, we would do that. And of course, we all had our again, another thing where path of life, lifestyle changes, things that were happening, and of course that's what led to the band itself like not really being active anymore. Like Larry got put somewhere in the bell tower in the Salvation Army. So he wasn't able to be active. Sid was going through his own life issues, a lot of difficulties and hardships where he wasn't going to be able to be active. You were on your journey of marriage,
Yeah.
and then also all the working you had to do so that way you could move out of the house and live with your wife and start that life. And then it came down to me trying to figure out, well, what's left for me type thing.
Mhm.
And then I also noticed that like when still trying to be active in music within the Spanish church community, what happened was a lot of the more progressive minded churches, I wasn't really like connected with them as like I normally was with the more traditional. Of course, leave it up to me to end up having the more slightly old school try to come after me again. And then, of course, because there was a void to be filled in terms of music, it was like, all right, fine. Yeah, I kind of caved. It was that people pleasing problem,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that growing up as a Christian we tend to bump into a lot. A
Yeah.
lot of people pleasing because we don't want to disappoint, because we're fearing of getting burned to the stake and whatnot, right? Um, and then this is where that point of me needing to distance myself a lot from Christians began. This is where it began because all of a sudden I was getting active as a solo musician. Okay, cool. That's fine. In the process, on the side, I was actually learning how to use Logic Pro 10, how to use an audio interface on my own. Before, I was overtly ambitious and got myself like an over 8 channel audio interface, except that the band was no longer having a viable spot to jam at anymore to even put this to the test, and the fact that life happened. But I started learning how to do more solo stuff and learned that on my own. Granted, because I was living with my dad, there were a lot of constraints.
Yeah.
So the same with creativity, I kind of felt like I was in a box. But what helped me get outside was all these gigs in churches because, well, it helped me get my creative outlet out there. But then, of course, now with the experience that we're learning, I was able to learn how to have incorporate my sound and find a balance between that more traditional Latin sound while bringing in my alternative rock sound and bringing it together. But then, as I started jamming with some of these guys, then the conversation going, we're like, hey man, we love to have you full time here, except that one problem. I was like, okay. And when the conversation began about me needing to choose between going all the way with them or uh, going all the way with them or staying friends with one of my besties with Sid. Oh, that's when I pulled out. I said, nope, I'm done. I'm done. I was done with them, and I started seeing that cult mentality that I often see in a lot of churches, especially in the Pentecostal movement in New York City. It's like, no, you're gonna force me, like I said in the last episode, between selling my soul to Yah, basically,
Hmm.
and then ditch the one best friend that's gone through the hardest of times but has been there for me along with you. I'm like, nah, I'm staying with my peoples. My peoples, they had my back and I'm having theirs. I'm not gonna ditch them when they're at their lowest just because um, perception of spiritual faith has, you know, dispersed elsewhere.
Right.
And I couldn't deal with that. And then as time grew on and even yeah, as time grew on, I just felt that rift where it's like church community and I just couldn't really align anymore because I started seeing how they treat certain people, and then it's like they want, the downtrodden, the broken, descent to come in the group, but to make themselves appear inclusionary. But when you find out what Christianity really is, it's actually an exclusive club.
Yeah. Oh man. And my dad
Like think
brought that
like,
up.
and I might get some forks heading our way with this, but like for example, I have friends that are trans. I
Yeah.
have friends that are gay, lesbian. Heck, I got family members that are gay and lesbian for crying out loud.
Yeah.
From my kid's mom's side, as well as an uncle from my dad's side, whatever. And they have Christianity has a stance where it is when it comes to people of those lives, and I'm like, yeah, I can't fuck with y'all, you
Yeah.
know. And then if you and listen to a certain type of music, you're going to hell. If you love someone that you can't reproduce with, you're going to hell. Like you go further and further and further. It's like, yeah, I can't rock with this religion no more. I really can't. I'm having a fallout here, and I can't deny it anymore. And then at one point, I tried to rediscover my faith
Mhm.
and oddly enough, it was during 2015, 2016, because I was seeing online in the algorithm, especially on Facebook, where I saw a lot of people posting a lot of anti-Christian stuff up the wazoo. Like in the same way that people that are more progressive see a lot of pro-Christian and anti-progressive stuff thrown at them,
Yeah.
I was seeing the reverse. And I was like, you know what? I need to just sit down, read the Bible for myself, get away from everyone. And then even then, as I reread and I still find myself concluding like you can't you can't be a progressive person and be a Christian. Sorry. It just don't work. It just don't work. And the sad part is that I know people that, that are of the rainbow mafia, but yet still hanging on to their Christian faith. And I'm like,
How do you reconcile the two? Yeah, it's a
you
difficult
can't.
question.
You can't. It's like people that enjoy astrology, numerology,
Mhm.
and all these ologies, but then still cling on, not meaning the Star Trek reference, but cling on to the Christian faith. Is like, bro, it's not compatible.
Yeah.
They just aren't. Like, if you all you gotta do, look at the Book of Revelations. Hell, it shows the entire list of everyone that's not entering heaven, and I'm like, yeah,
The
yeah.
funny thing about that, and I'm glad, there's such a hyperfixation on sin and this, and they make it seem if we're gonna go by the Bible standard, then we're all going to hell. We're all doomed. Because if all sin is equal in the eyes of God, correct me if I'm wrong, is not fornication the same as adultery? Is it not the same as homosexuality? Is it not the same as lying? You see what I'm saying? As stealing. If we're gonna equate apples and oranges and just say it's all equal all across the board because it just makes God angry, then the same pastor who's committing adultery or the same deacon who's abusing his wife or the same person who's lying about tithes is the same person that's going to hell alongside the homosexual, alongside the trans, alongside the fornicator. You know what I'm saying?
It gets
You can't
they'll
just
burn it
say we're
anyway.
holier than thou when you also hold the mantle of sin. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's just wild. And then not only that, um, because I'm treading carefully. It's an exclusionary club. Like you can't be included. You can't like. And I've seen this a lot where it'd be like, oh yeah, we're being. I'm like, bro, if you have read the Bible, if you've read all the tenets and everything that is structured within the belief system,
Right.
there are people that are simply not gonna make it.
Yeah.
And then the irony is, of course, you have people who wave the banner and they're just as crooked. Like it's weird how you'll have a lot of Christians really going on the picket fence, going cuckoo over the gays, calling them abominations, this, that, or whatever. Meanwhile, you still got priests diddling kids. You
Yeah.
got pastors doing the P Diddy, and so on and so forth. And the weird part is, these are also the same type of people that look at someone that's from the rainbow community and call them groomers. Meanwhile,
They're doing it themselves.
I'm like, they're the ones doing it. Like, if you were to sit down and just look up how often, it's like, yo, the most religious, like, I remember one time I told someone, I was like, listen, usually the more homophobic a conservative or religious person is, yo, the more that closet is rattling.
Yeah.
They got a whole lot of bones in that closet, and they just don't want people to find out. And they're just internalizing their hatred because they've not been able to accept who they actually are
Yeah.
versus what they're trying to fit in. And because of fear of being outcasted and being thrown out of their community. And
To
then,
back on that, just to, I don't mean to
yes.
interrupt you, but
No, that's fine.
when I worked in law enforcement, the number one crime that goes unreported was crimes against men and unreported. And it made me think about all the men in our lives that we've come across and interacted with and become acquaintances with and performed music with. And from start to finish, if you think about every guy that you've come to know, how many of them have had these kind of inappropriate situations happen to them when they were younger, or, and this goes back to like just male and masculinity and the concept and in and outside of the church, and then by the clergy. Like let's go with that. Like just for the sake
Yeah.
of the context of what we're speaking of, even because I'm not going to blame all of those cases just on the clergy, but the ones
Right.
pertaining to the clergy belong to them. Like you got to own it. And I think about all the times that you hear about like, oh, the pastor took me behind the back and did stuff to me, or the priest, or so many, or like I personally have grown up in a household of abuse by a deacon, by, a member of the clergy, and it was terrible just growing up in that environment. It was hard, and to go to Sundays and everyone's praising God, rah rah, ha ha ha, and I was getting, part of my French, I was getting the shit beat out of me almost every night. Every night I was getting hit. And I remember it only stopped when I put a knife to this person's neck and I told him to get the F out the house. And it got to a point where I almost had to lose my life to protect someone else. And then that person in turn didn't even appreciate it. That person was like, you shouldn't have done that because they pay the bills. And it's like, yeah, but they were going to bash your head in. You know what I mean? So I'm one of many cases. I can speak, firsthand about this. And this is what I wanted to bring up, you know, being an outcast, because even within the community of church, they make you feel like there's always some kind of like, oh, you're wrong to question things, you're wrong to disobey, you're wrong to. And look, I understand structure in an organized religion, but at what point do we start talking about the stuff that goes on in the house? And then if you do, then the pastor tells the parents, and then it's a whole thing, and then there's no safe spaces for young men and women, and a lot of young men, because I'm bringing it back to us guys because we're guys talking. A lot of young men go through problems at home and they can't even talk about it for fear of shame, ridicule, or that you'll have you just brought up like a clergyman, and doing all kinds of inappropriate things with young boys and stuff.
Mhm.
And I think about how many guys were you know, abused, let's say, or inappropriately touched, and it just set about a certain stigma in their mind. They're like, well, I must be gay, or I must be this, and then it just like sent them down this path. So
Another thing to add to this, actually, there's a phrase I've heard not too long ago. It's called hurt people.
yeah,
When you look at, for example, a lot of these child abusers, a lot of these molesters and whatnot, they themselves were the victim of abuse.
yeah. And it's just a
And then,
perpetual cycle, and someone has to break the cycle.
yep. And
Someone has to
then,
say enough.
and the good thing is now is the fact that now we have therapy available. People are actually more open about, hey, listen, you went through this, you went through that. You need to go see a therapist. You need to see a
Yeah.
psychologist. Like you need professional help, blah, blah, blah. Back in the day,
Whew.
if people got abused, oh, God forbid you said anything, you know? And I'm not gonna bring any certain people, but I know someone, for example, whose relative was being abused and the abuser was within their religious circle.
Yeah.
And no matter how often they tell them what's going on, they were basically gaslighting the poor kid
Yeah.
into thinking that they're making this up or how dare you say this and whatnot and the third. And it wasn't until the abuser was gone where the abuser died where they were like, "Oh man, I didn't know." I was like, "You knew.
Yeah.
This kid told you. You didn't want to believe them, and now the consequences are coming to bite you in the ass. Now you have a very terrible relationship with them because you did not believe them when that piece of crap was still alive.
Yeah.
Now that he's dead, now you're gonna go ahead and believe them, which is so ass backwards."
Yeah.
And
It's tough.
and yeah, yeah, it's one of those things that is hard. And then not only that, ends up seeing this and knowing these things. Ooh, man. And then with a lot of, and I mean a lot of statutory rape going on in churches too. Oh, I ain't forget. And there's names I will not name either because, I ain't trying to start too much trouble.
Yeah, and that's their story to tell. Like there's
Well,
people
yeah, it
stories
is.
they need
And
to
the thing is
tell.
that some of them, they may not be willing to admit that they got groomed while young.
Yeah. And
Like
it
I
that's
knew
hard.
someone,
That's so hard for people to be willing and open to discussing. It's so hard. But
yeah.
bringing this back to Brotherhood of Outcasts, it's like I feel like when you started that, I wouldn't even say like it was you particularly started it, but it was almost like we had our own movement going where people would just flock to us and we would get the people who were like, going through these problems. Because I'm bringing this all back together. I'm tying it all in. And our ideology seemed to be one of love and acceptance
Mm.
within the whole chaos of Christianity and us finding our way out of it. Whereas like Christianity rejected these people. And it was like, these are the people you most need to help. These are the people you need to break your back for and give the shirt off your back and feed and say, hey, we have an open door here if you need to escape this kind of trauma in your house. We have special places where you could go where you can be safe and that are protected where you can, we can help you and give you resources. And it just always felt like the church lacked that. Like for a church of community, it was never about the community and it was all about the church.
Yep, and it was all about just keeping their circle safe, their own little bubble safe. Meanwhile, you got all, and then here's the part where I kind of felt socially out of element growing up, particularly in my church. So, for example, me growing up, my parents were always together,
Yeah.
but a good chunk of the kids that were in our age demographic when I was growing up in my church, divorced,
Yeah.
divorced parents, left and right. And the thing is, like, of course, me being a kid, I wouldn't know how to have a conversation about that, because my parents were always together. And then, of course, I had my own bubble of understanding of how that is until, of course, many, many years later.
Mm.
But I didn't realize even back then, it's like, shoot, like one of my homies, his parents divorced. It just wasn't working out. Another kid divorced, and it turns out that the dad was not only unfaithful, but with a prostitute. Another one, she was being raised by her grandmother because both her parents died from illness
Sad.
while she was a baby. Like this type of stuff, I'm like, ugh. And then another one where you have a brother and sister raised by the grandma because their parents died due to drug use. Like it's that type of stuff. I'm like, like it made you wonder. I'm like, from there on, then I should have known right there. I was like, I'm never going to have a typical circle of friends. And I'm okay with that because the truth is there's no such thing as normal. I mean, you look at
Right.
like and the thing is, and this is where again another pushback I had with a lot of Christian folks. They expected me to just stay in their bubble because everyone will be normal. In reality, there's just a bunch of folks using religion as their copium.
Yeah.
When in reality, they have none of their issues resolved and they're just praying to Sky Daddy that it'll just go away. I'm like, meanwhile, you got all these folks. They're going through some serious shit. Some of them never met their parents, never got to grow up with their parents, or only got to grow up with their mom while the dad was far away. So on and so forth and so forth, and it's like a whole maelstrom of conflict. And then finding my way in life where I can somehow fit in and connect, it was hard for me.
So you would say outside of the lack of loyalty, because I noticed you did mention the friends and always being there for people who were like us and having loyalty to that cause, combined with ideological differences, is what began was the catalyst for the departing the faith.
Yeah, it got to where it's like, you know, I just couldn't connect anymore, and I had my loss of religion.
Yeah.
You know, it's just how it is. And then I've been noticing this the past couple of years, especially if you look online about deconstruction and how a lot of people that are still hanging on to the Christian faith, they're like, oh, you shouldn't deconstruct because then you'll be an atheist. I'll be like, bro, the whole point of deconstructing is so that you tear everything down, build back up, do your soul searching, build back up, and then see where you actually end up. Some people, they deconstruct, reconstruct, and they refine their faith. And somehow they found a way to bring it all together where it's like, okay, my understanding is different, but I managed to come back to the faith anyway. And ultimately still be back where I was in. But you also have a lot of us, well, we deconstruct, and as we reconstruct, we're like, yeah,
Please don't align. Yeah.
yep, the beliefs and values do not align.
Yeah.
Something has to change.
And
And
honestly, that's
you
where
have
we're
to,
at.
yeah. And then, we end up being spiritually homeless if you really want to look at it in that regard. And that's okay, because we're used to always having a place to belong, but then when you find out the place you belong in, you can't really belong in anymore. It's like at that point you got to make your own tribe. You have to make your own group of friends that you can actually get together, relate, and grow with. And in the thing too, it's hard. It's very hard. And then when you're in your 30s,
Harder.
heading into 40s, it's even more difficult because now life is definitely time has marched on.
Yeah.
Like
So
we're
what you're
parents now.
saying is you need to make your own Brotherhood of Outcasts.
Yeah, pretty much. That's really where we're at now. You know, the island of misfit toys, just like the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer film.
Well, Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of the series. We look forward to having you in the future because this is great. This has been great content. It's been great just, rehashing old times, and there's just so much more to explore. I know you'll be joining us for the purity segment, and I'm excited to talk about that. So thanks
That's
again
gonna be
for
fun.
being a part of this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ronnie Gonzalez, writer, poet, author, signing off. Torres, take care.